at this T20 side event on catalyzing inclusive climate innovations for a global impact economy. Today, we gather here with a shared vision and a sense of urgency to address one of the most pressing challenges of our time, climate change. In this room, we have the privilege of hosting some of the brightest minds and accomplished individuals from the corporate sector, SMEs, politics, policy, think tanks, and non-profit organizations. We are releasing 2 research publications for global consultation on unlocking climate technologies for global south and catalyzing climate and ESG finance for SMEs and supply chains. Throughout this event, we'll engage in critical discussions and reflect on observations and gather feedback. The final reports will be submitted to the T20 Secretariat in the coming days. At the outset, I'd like to thank all our super supportive working group members and our amazing partners. Terry, our co-hosts, Desai and Associates, our convening partners, Mahindra University and M1 Exchange, our knowledge partners, and our supporting partners, Capgemini, Protean eGov, and the Rockefeller Foundation. I'll now bring up the agenda for the day. So here is how our 90 minutes are lined up. So without any further ado, I'd like to invite Amit Bhatia to kick this event off and present his welcome note. Over to you, Amit.
Thank you, Harpreet. And welcome everyone. And, it's great to see you all. We are on the dot, and I think we are going to end exactly at 6 p.m. IST today. We have lined up a great bevy of speakers who have amazing expertise in climate technology and climate finance, the 2 subjects we're going to kind of grapple with today. But we have set up this event as a global consultation, and we have put up on our website, aspireimpact.in, the 2 reports which have been, co-authored by the 50 working group members who are with us today. About 4 months ago, as India's, G20 presidency gathered steam, we felt that it would be wonderful if we can also contribute. As a ESG sustainability impact measurement firm, we found ourselves in the middle of many discussions, which made it clear that this global quest for net zero requires a wider partnership. It was very clear we have to engage a lot more corporations from global south. And more importantly, we have to get the SMEs from around the world into the movement to really make this, vision of a low carbon economy come true. We took 4 ideas to the T20 Secretariat. And after a fair amount of discussions, everyone felt that there are 2 ideas that we must submit to G20 Secretariat this year. And it required us to collaborate and bring on board many people for these ideas to be credible, for them to be thought through. And you just heard from Harpreet, we got some amazing partners to support us. And I want to, second Harpreet's word of thanks to all our partners who joined in this mission. But more importantly, we needed 50 people who would dedicate their time and wisdom over this last few months. And we found these 50 awesome working group members with whom we have co-authored these 2 reports. The reports are available on our website, and we'll all have a week. Send in our feedback, to send in your comments, and we're going to integrate all that into the final recommendations that we submit into the T20 Secretariat. Today, we're going to get both these working group co-chairs to kind of, in literally 15 minutes, present the highlights of this work over the last few months. And that's a lot to pack, given that 25 people met several times, over these last few months to put together these recommendations. But you're going to get the gist of all this from the 2 co-chairs of each of the working groups and a few reflections, from some of the working group members. Given the time constraint, not everyone is going to speak from the working groups, but you will see when you see the star cast that these are all people who are doing keynotes every day, and it's an amazing amount of wisdom that has been concentrated into these two reports. So without further ado, I want to just introduce these 50 wonderful working group members to you. And we're going to do it through a quick 2-minute video. So you know who are these people, whose words, and whose thoughts you are finding in these two sets of recommendations. So I'm going to request our team to quickly play this video and introduce the working group members. Big applause for our working group members who made these two reports possible. And it is my pleasure now to invite Mr. Nitin Desai for a special address. Mr. Nitin Desai is chair of TERI. He is the former chief economic advisor to the government of India, former undersecretary general at United Nations. And obviously without his support, such a big effort would not have happened. So thank you so much, Mr. Desai, and over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm here really as the chair of the Advisory Council of Desai and Associates. But I really go back in my involvement in this, what you are going to be discussing over the next hour and a half, goes back a long time, nearly 40 years ago in the Brundtland Commission, later when I was the Deputy Secretary General of Rio, then Under Secretary General, etc. The two things which strike me. And those days, 35, 40 years ago, our focus was on getting people to worry more about climate. This has changed. The degree of awareness of the risks of climate has increased enormously. Second, much of our discussion was on relationships between governments, the principles that should govern that. And one of the principles which was developed in the context of the climate process and the Rio conference, which I was associated with, was that of common but differentiated responsibility. And our focus was very much on the relationship of common but differentiated responsibility between governments. What I'm really happy about is today it has gone much beyond that. And we are now just not talking in terms of common but differentiated responsibility between governments, but also about the larger setup of people in operations, people in civil society organizations, and so on. And when you talk about common but differentiated responsibility, it will also mean something that you have to apply at the national level. So I'm very happy to see that you'll be talking to us about how one can start doing much more on the two issues of common but differentiated responsibility, which dominated discussion, finance and technology. And you have focused a substantial amount of attention on something that is required of common but differentiated responsibility, not just between governments, but within countries, between large enterprises and small enterprises, et cetera, et cetera. So in many ways, what you're doing is truly a forward movement in something which in my days was just one of raising awareness, getting governments to worry. Now I see corporations are worried about this. And corporations are addressing this issue. In some ways, some of them are doing more than even governments are doing, if you see the science-based initiatives, etc. So in my days, when we did the Rio conference, there were only 20 CEOs from the world who participated in a CEO meeting there. Today, if you hold a meeting like this, you'll have to virtually hold a separate meeting of corporates. We have to do that already 10 years later in Johannesburg in 2002. So I'm really happy to see this, and I look forward to see what are the working level proposals which will come from the two working groups, because that will really translate something which was a diplomatic process into something which is a practical developmental process implemented not just globally, but nationally, regionally, right down to the smallest settlement. So thank you very much for inviting me to this, and I stop here and look forward to listening to what your working groups have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Desai. It's wonderful to have you and Desai and Associates as the guiding force behind this event. So thank you very much. I know you're all eagerly awaiting to hear what are these key findings of this research and what are these recommendations. So I would now like to turn to our first working group, which was on climate finance for SMEs. And I would like to invite our two co-chairs, to kind of present the idea which holds great potentials to include the SMEs into this quest for net zero. So I want to first welcome Mr. Suresh Sethi, MD and CEO of Protean eGov. It's a population scale technology company that builds state-of-the-art digital public infrastructure and e-governance solutions. So everyone who's Indian here, your Aadhaar card and your income tax PAN card are all coming from his organization, and it is doing much, much more, as you're about to learn. So let's invite Mr. Suresh Sethi to kick us off and present what were the findings of this working group.
Thank you, Amit. Thank you, Amit, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to this session. I think, as Amit rightly called out, our first call out is to link climate finance and link it to ESG-led finance for the SMEs. As we all know, SMEs are a critical link in the supply chains across global economies. Sorry, just had a bad throat. They are a critical link, and according to World Bank, the climate change can potentially wipe out 40% of SMEs in the developing countries by 2030. Now, when we look at some of these numbers, we do realize they are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And our supply chains will always be only as strong as the weakest link. In India alone, 30% is contributed by SMEs to the GDP, and they contribute to 40% of the country's workforce which compared to world economy is somewhere in 50 to 70% of the contribution to GDP or workforce. Now when we look at some of these staggering factors, there is a clear call out that while global trade finance or supply chain finance was almost a 7.3 trillion market in 2019-20, and as you can see, estimated to grow to 8.7 trillion, it is clearly a lifeline for SMEs, empowering them to capitalize on international business opportunities, contribute to economic growth within domestic supply chains. But there is almost a 1.7 to 3 trillion financing gap. And SMEs are yet to be brought into the fold of sustainability. A lot of countries, including India, have today put out norms for sustainability measurement, but they're largely covering the large institutions and have not reached the SME level. Interestingly, there are statistics which talk about the fact that almost 30 to 40% of global assets under management have moved to an impact continuum, either in ESG or in sustainability or impact in investments. So therefore, clearly we are on a journey where we can create an impact economy. And if we strengthen our SME base and link them to impact finance, it is going to be a must to be able to meet the right continuum on impact. So therefore, while we empower the SMEs, some of the critical challenges we see are in terms of information asymmetry. Today, the climate finance market itself is so fragmented and complex. It makes it difficult for SMEs to find the right products and services. At the same time, the SMEs also today at times lack the wherewithal to understand how they can adopt sustainable practices and how they can be linked directly to their business outcomes. Because it is important that any initiative taken has to ultimately make them more sustainable in their lines of business. So we have now an opportunity to integrate climate finance into SME financing and address the gaps. And for that, if we look at it, and as we talk about digital interventions or population scale interventions, a digital public infrastructure becomes very critical. And what does it solve for? It solves for unbiased discovery. Now, critically, it can remove information asymmetry by enabling an open discovery of solutions like climate finance. Equally important, when you are creating an open network, you need to have players on it who are credentialed. So ESG scores become a critical mechanism with which there can be SMEs on one end of the discovery cycle, and on the other side, there could be a repository of accredited climate finance providers. Indian green bond issuances have today reached a total of $21 billion as of Feb 23. And we clearly see there is a lot of initiative happening in the place of finance being made available. And open finance networks are going to be critical for us to take this ecosystem towards the matching and towards enabling the supply chains. With that, I would like to hand over to Sandeep to continue with the next slide and hear his comments. Thank you.
And Sandeep, sorry, I had not introduced you earlier, which I should have. Sandeep is our second co-chair. He's the promoter director of M1 Exchange, which is redefining business growth for SMEs through digital factoring services on India's central bank's digital platform. So yes, Sandeep, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Amit, and thanks, Suresh. Good evening and good morning to many of you, and maybe good night to many of you, with operating from different time zones. So like Suresh said, this is the core group established the fact that SME financing, if linked with climate financing, can solve the challenge to an extent for making the SMEs greener. And when the group dwelled into the various case studies globally, that how is this happening? One such case study which came to light, the first point, which is mentioned as Tolia versus EcoVadis, is exactly which caught the attention and the eye, and that's why I am in this picture today. Is Tolia as a platform is exactly what we do in India as M1 Exchange, which is a trades platform. Tolia is not regulated, but TREADS in India is a regulated platform, and EcoVadis is an agency which does rating globally on the sustainability for the enterprises. Both of them together have set up an initiative wherein the supply chain finance to the enterprises is offered using the ratings given by EcoVadis on the platform, and the financiers, which are the banks or any other financial institutions, offering incentivization for greener enterprises basis the ratings of the EcoVadis. So if that's a kind of a case study which opened our eyes as well, that all developing countries, and specifically in our case as India, when we have similar platforms, we could replicate a situation like this in India, and this could bring forward a lot of finance for SMEs, wide supporting them for their ecosystem or their ESG initiatives. Such initiatives are also being taken by other case studies, which we realized, whether it is HSBC, Walmart, or whether it is Deutsche Bank, EcoVadis, or Intel or Unilever. And if this is happening in the West side, the East side of the world, or the G20 nations can actually adopt it. And that's what the group has brought it into the study, which will be published. Now comes the point, why a platform, or why, can corporates run their own supply chain? Do they do that? So can this be offered to the SMEs, wide individual supply chains of the corporates, which was a manual process run many years? Yes, it can be done, and it will be done. Having said that, the platforms like Taulia/M1 are more like networks, wherein all the banks, all the corporates, all the SMEs have already locked in, and they're already getting their invoices/receivables discounted. So it has become a many-to-many relationship. One SME enterprise serving multiple customers, getting financing from multiple banks, his ESG rating, if made available on platform, can be cross-utilized for many supply chains and could be used for financing by many banks. So that's a kind of an initiative which can, or a value add, which a platform approach can bring in. Of course, in India, we would need a government support like in any other geography, wherein the standardization of ESG categorization for the SMEs, the incentivization for the banks to give better finance to the ESG rated SMEs, all those initiatives will have to be backed by the government, which will be, in fact, one of the key points which the study will present. With all this, I'll request Amit to now take it forward and
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that's the recommendation, that we believe that SMEs can be brought into the ESG sustainability impact movement to accelerate global, transition to net zero by linking this finance to climate. And we will get a government perspective on it shortly. We're lucky to have Mr. Atish Kumar Singh, who's representing the Ministry of Micro, Small and Medium Enterprises. He will shortly give a special address, but let me, because we had 25 working group members in each group, I'm going to call on Adriana now, who joins us from Global Alliance for Banking on Values from Amsterdam, who was part of this group, worked with this group over these past 2 months to give her perspective that as a working group member, someone reflecting on this, what struck her most and what's the message that she's going to be leaving with this working group. Adriana, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Amit. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to provide these reflections. First of all, I want to emphasize the why is clear. There is an urgent need to create a different real economy, one that is low carbon, contributes to an inclusive and sustainable future. And there is an opportunity to incentivize SMEs and supply chains to adopt sustainable practices, to help stabilize Earth systems like climate and nature, and address their vulnerabilities to disruptions. The how, promoting ESG-linked finance for SMEs, is advanced in the report. In short, And I believe, as the report rightly shows, digital innovation and ESG principles present an opportunity for a transformative solution. Moreover, despite the diversity of SMEs globally, there is an emerging consensus in support of pursuing this area of opportunity and a growing appetite for change amongst SMEs. The report rightfully recognizes that platform-based ESG-led finance is not an independent solution, but a component of the broader ecosystem where diverse stakeholders, including governments and financial institutions, coordinate for a common purpose. I would like now to share a reflection on the what, which in my view is the most essential. Already the co-chairs have touched upon it. The set of environmental and/or social indicators to prioritize must by design have a clear relationship, a clear connection to the unsustainable outcomes that we seek to overcome and contribute to addressing SMEs' vulnerability while making them resilient to climate change impacts, amongst others. To conclude, keeping the envisioned future in mind, that is, what sort of economy, social, environmental, infrastructure, community landscapes we want to create must remain core to our efforts. Our thinking in this space cannot ignore the highly contextual nature of some of the unsustainable and environmental social practices of SMEs. And we need to be inclusive and diverse while recognizing that SMEs have limited resources and there are significant capacity gaps. This is an opportunity, one that we must collaboratively pursue. We must cast, in my view, our net wide and consider best practices in support of ESG-linked SME transformation, including by existing platforms, as highlighted in the report, and also examples from front-runner institutions, including some of the values-based banks I have worked with, who after years integrating non-financial information in client assessments, have data to support the identification of place-based configurations of ESG factors that are most conducive to positive change locally and at the system level. The work carried by Aspire Circle and Aspire Impact and the working group constitutes, in my view, a solid building block for advancing supply chain transformation and SME resilience in support of an inclusive low carbon future. Thank you for the opportunity to share these reflections. I look forward to the improvements that will result from the public consultation. It has been a true pleasure for me to be part of this effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Ariana. And I'm hoping that if we had enough time to get all our working group members to speak, they would echo what you said. And it's now my pleasure to, request Mr. Atish Kumar Singh, Joint Secretary, Ministry of Micro, Small, Medium Enterprises, Government of India, to provide his reflections and feedback on these recommendations. If you don't know Mr. Atish Kumar Singh is a 1994 batch IRTS officer, and I'm told he has been independent of all that's going on in our working group, thinking about greening the MSME sector. So Mr. Singh, would love to hear what's on your mind.
Thank you, Mr. Bhatia. First of all, I wish to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to speak to all of you on this global consultation process. So I've had a chance to briefly look at the Impact Future Report, and it's pretty heartening to learn that this research paper has been able to explore the entire landscape and provide a 360-degree view of the ground situation, as it were. So I noted down that there are three areas where they've kind of brought out very, very beautifully. One is they've mentioned that we need to bring in greater efforts to initiate a change in the mindset and increase the awareness on climate change on the MSME front. Second thing which I noted from the report was with respect to designing initiatives for technical assistance, for market access, and for risk mitigation. And the third one was on benchmarking and ESG ratings. So I just wanted to contextualize this with respect to what's happening on the government front. And so some of the policy developments which are on the anvil are pretty much in alignment with what the report is talking about. So the first and foremost is I believe the Secretary Environment is also on the call and she will be talking about it. But this is one of the big ticket reforms which the government is undertaking. It is the Green Credit Program, which will be notified under the Environment Protection Act of 1986. So this here, a lot of work is going on, and so a draft formulation has already been developed. And so the Ministry of MSME is working with the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change to get a separate chapter on MSMEs to incorporate in its fold, what we call as a green taxonomy for both the debt side and the equity side. So other than creating a model for green finance specific for MSMEs, we are also being very careful to make sure that it also comes out as a mechanism to prevent greenwashing. That's a big area of concern, also which we thought which needs to be incorporated into the game. In the report, I also saw that there is mention of the MSME Ministry's sustainability program, where we are taking the zero effect, zero defect regime forward. And so while what is happening right now is there is some scale over there, but there are still miles to go. But on the side, we are also redeveloping the Z program to bring in services into its fold. Presently, the Z program is for the manufacturing side. We are developing a Z certification for services. We are developing a Z certification specifically for Khadi industry, which is so very important and in India, Khadi and village industries. There is work going on to develop, what we like to call as ZX, that is the Z certification for improving the exportability. And here we are trying to align, most of the assessment parameters with the global norms. Then there is, already something called as RAMP, that is the Raising and Accelerating MSME Performance Program, which is being run, through the World Bank funding. So here, I know a number of things are happening on the green fund. Green is pretty much high on the agenda of this program. So the ministry is, bringing out two specific, products, public products, which are, something which your report has been talking about. So one of them is going to be called the Scheme for Promotion and Investment in Circular Economy. It's called MSME Spice. So it will be a dedicated product for the MSME sector. It will provide government contribution through a subsidy for availing affordable finance to MSMEs to adopt circular economy for Udyam registered MSMEs. So it will also, have special focus on notified regulations, that is of the plastic waste management, the rubber waste management, and e-waste management. It will also help the MSMEs to comply with their extended producer responsibility, which have been outlined in these documents, and also help waste cycling, achieve waste cycling recycling targets. Another product which we are developing is the Green MSME Development Fund. In this, we are hoping to create a mechanism to incentivize the MSME sector to adopt green technologies through interest subventions, through guarantees and awareness. So these are the things which are on the anvil and which will be coming out very shortly. But what I really wanted to tell you more is, on your report, and what is the delta or the plus you may like to add, you may like to consider for your report. So my personal belief is that while there is some sandboxing arrangement available through the RBI and through the GIFT City network, but we need to proliferate this regime. We need to have more such facilities to allow people to develop their ideas for green finance and ESG finance for MSMEs, and also these are limited to certain pockets and certain sectors and certain regions of the country. But this is a regime which we need to proliferate. We need to develop many more of such centers, so that I just want to share with you. We did 3 MSME hackathons, and why I'm telling you this is the number, the kind, the volume and the depth which is there in the country. People are brimming with ideas. It's just that those ideas are unable to find their true surface and to go forward. And so while, like I said, there are 2 sandbox arrangements available, there are some incubation centers and accelerators available. We need to develop this space. We need to develop this institution very largely. You may like to consider this for your report. Second, of my recommendations to you is that see the entire ecosystem around the greening and MSMEs. There are a ton of things happening. So there are issues on regulatory front. There are supervision issues. There are issues in promotion and development. There is information, education, communication, hand-holding, training, capacity building is a big requirement in this sector. and there may be many more research and development. We need to develop, or have some institutional, agencies, some kind of centralized agencies at the national level, at the state level, or maybe even at the sectoral level to tackle all these issues together in one place. Third, thing I wanted to bring out is your report is talking about trade finance and supply chain finance. So while that is great and fantastic, but I would draw your attention to also consider, looking the entire thing from a cluster base. What's happening in the clusters? There are, some reports say there are 800 clusters. There are, so many more informal clusters. So a cluster approach to financing and to the MSMEs on the ESG front is another thing which you may like to consider and develop. Then there is also the MSME Act, the MSME Act 2006. Now here the government is again considering going in for amendments to the Act, and the idea is to enable and empower the government to bring in greater responsibility and greater force to get into the green regime. So I am inviting ideas and suggestions from the House and through your report to help us amend the Act and give allow the government to have more enabling powers and authority to forward the green agenda. And two things which which may be kind of negative in some way, but then I think we need to have a conversation around that. We need to at least listen to that side of the story. We need to listen to what is the CBAM, that is the cross-border adjustment mechanism. What's happening over there? While a lot of it is outside the WTO regime, and it's talking about a number of things which is which might come in the way of promotion and development. While greening is a top agenda over there, I understand that, but we need to listen to that conversation. What can we do over here? That is something which you might like to consider. And lastly, but not leastly, there is. If you've been following the U.S. Elections path, there is great conversation today in America about ESG. There are issues around ESG. Several states have come out with policies which are totally debunking the ESG theory. We need to listen to that conversation. We need to hear what's happening over there. With that, I'll just close my thoughts. Thank you very much for allowing me the chance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Singh. And you touched on so many variety of issues in that short time. So thankful. I think the Indian government's green agenda for SMEs is quite impressive. We are heartened to know that at least we were not on the on the wrong track in making these recommendations, and they will find a good audience with yourself and others. Thank you so very much. I also want to thank both Suresh Sethi and Sandeep Mahindra again for co-chairing this, Adriana and all our working group members to contribute to this. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the first, idea that, under this, event we wanted to present. I want to now move to the second recommendation that we are making. And for that, I want to bring both the co-chairs of our second working group on climate technologies. And these are, you see on your screen, Corey Glickman and Anirban Ghosh. Corey Glickman, ladies and gentlemen, is the Chief Sustainability Officer for Infosys, joining us from Pittsburgh. Anirban Ghosh is right now the Head of Sustainability Center at Mahindra University, formerly Group Chief Sustainability Officer for Mahindra Group. And they co-led the second working group, and the 25 of those working group members are here with us. So once again, Corey and Anirban are going to quickly present the findings of this second working group. So over to Corey and Anirban.
First of all, thank you, everybody. I'm Corey Glickman with Infosys, as Amit has introduced me. And first, I'd like to thank the working group members and the organizers of this very important session here and the creation of these reports. Next slide, please. So I think what we really have to start with very quickly is we're in a climate emergency right now. Many of the predictions that we've been talking about since the Paris Accords have talked about this need to stay at the 1.5 Celsius mark Guess what? We have already hit that this year and this summer. We were all aware of those events. And we don't need to extrapolate in a short time of what that means. But the second most important emergency is that there's an imbalance globally about how is this going to be solved. Make no mistake, we are actually in a race. We're seeing huge amounts of investment that are taking place in the global north, particularly in Europe and in America, where they have linked the economies to climate technologies, realizing that technologies themselves are really the foundational change factor. It can affect up to 90% towards the solving of the climate emergency that we are going through. But it doesn't address the emergency that we were talking about, just transition, and what happens with the rest of the world in global south. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second here. But what's really important, just to understand some of these numbers, the amount of investment, which we will see, because we've seen these numbers, are in the trillions. But the large percentage of this is really taking place based off the numbers that we saw from our working group and what we've seen from outside sources, is that the amount of investment is just so imbalanced at this point. The one exception that I would like to say is that what we're seeing in India right now. So India, which traditionally has been a leader in technology, as we know globally, the investments towards the areas of climate change from 2016 to 2020 was a total of 1.2 billion USD was raised in this direction. In this year alone, in the first half of the year, we've already seen 800 million investment take place in India. So India is taking a lead in this. I wouldn't even call it the global south anymore because of the level of investment that we're seeing here and the level of technology lead. But the rest of the world is really lagging behind here. And this is going to cause great complications for us, an imbalance. So if we look at this, what could we say are the reasons for? One of the areas when we talk about technologies is certain to do with patents and IPs. How does that get managed? We saw this during COVID. We've seen this during other major global emergency programs. And a large link to this also has to do with where private equity takes place. When we look at the decisions of technology companies with policies, as they're led by the wealthy, whether they are governments or whether by their private equity, they make the decisions taken across here. This does not address what happens across the whole world, when the majority of the world does not have that power at this point. So, for instance, when we think of mobility, the amount of investment that we've seen take place in mobility on the technology, the investments have been 40%, 48% actually of investments, and only 15% of that investments towards technology addresses climate emissions. By contrast, we know that industry as a whole adds to 34% of the global emissions, but only has managed to secure only 9% of the total venture capital. So private equity investors are making the decisions of what technologies they believe are going to be important for the bottom line and for the future top line, and not necessarily linking it to the idea of climate change technologies across here. And this is what this working group really focused on, is how do we correct this trend here? So the idea and the concept is the idea of a climate technologies clearinghouse. So this initiative will enable just not the pathway towards a quick correction, but also start to stabilize and normalize this idea of standards that come across for supply chains, for this enablement of technologies at a global level. But there's several things that we need to do in order to make this collective action take place. So it's not just a matter of what's currently taking place, and we simply see another form, what I would call green colonialism or neocolonialism, that says the wealthy stay wealthy and the rest of the world sits with what it's dealing with right now and perhaps even spins to a worse area. So there are 4 specific recommendations that this report and this council has come up with. The first is we need to overcome the barriers to technology access by creating affordability, by understanding this effectiveness and having this happen at a global level. Second, facilitate a collective bargaining to lower technology rates. How do we take these costs so that it becomes accessible and affordable in order for this to scale across here at the global level? 3, we need to emphasize the technology transfer. So we have to have access to the finance as discussed in the first part of this session, and we have to have the knowledge sharing and the capacity building to take place across here. And the fourth point, call to action, is to focus on specific technologies, what I would call practical technologies that are the balance between the adaptation, also what are the mitigation strategies for adoption to take across here, how do we prevent this green colonialism to occur, and we also avoid the greenwashing. And this idea of a clearing technology house is really about how do we do this in a just transition way. And we believe that what we've seen come out of this report and the investments that India has made as perhaps the seat for this clearinghouse of technologies will enable the whole globe to move across and to create this balance to go across here. So with this, I'd like to hand the next part of the discussion over to my co-chair, Anirban, who's going to deal a little bit more into the details of what such a technology house would look like. Thank you.
Thank you, Corey. Thank you for bringing out the way investments are going into green technologies. In fact, it may be fair to say that we are probably at the beginning of the next industrial revolution, because we have to figure out ways of doing what we do today in a greener way, and also figure out ways of doing new things which we have never done before, but work within planetary boundaries. As Corey mentioned, the last time there was an industrial revolution, we saw a lot of economic colonialism happening. And one of the bugbears of that was that technology didn't really move from the people who had it to the people who needed it. It is time for us to work in a collaborative way and ensure that technology moves from those who have it to those who need it, because the problem we are trying to solve is a problem that's going to affect everybody. The Climate Technology Clearinghouse aims to be a platform that will accelerate decarbonization by bringing the buyers and the sellers of technology together. And even as those who have technologies to offer come onto the platform and make their technologies available to everybody around the world, supply will create its own demand, which, as you heard from Mr. Sethi at the beginning, is already showing signs of accelerating. So even as demand is growing, it is important to be able to bring suppliers of green technologies to the people who need the technology to decarbonize. As we move in this direction and new technologies start getting adopted, there will be very strong signals for capital allocation for R&D for technologies that are likely to have the most impact. We will then actually overcome many patent-related bottlenecks by using a market mechanism. As technologies get adopted, we will also have a very good chance to enable the generation of credits that are kosher, carbon credits that are credible, and therefore also create an ecosystem where carbon trade can become something that ensures the transition towards a decarbonized world and reduces the chances of greenwashing. This clearinghouse will help countries, especially the global south, achieve their NDCs. It will also incentivize the best to develop climate tech and contribute towards a growing economy, provide jobs, and do all the other good things that a good industrial revolution can enable. We would like the clearinghouse to serve as a trade hub and not just as a knowledge hub, and enable the transfer of technologies and the availability of technologies, like from those who are able to develop the technologies to those who can use it usefully to decarbonize heavily around the world. This is a problem that we need to solve together. And there can be no better collaborative mechanism than a clearinghouse to enable the movement of technologies. The clamor for technologies is not new. It's been going on for a very long time. In fact, India has been wanting various kinds of technologies from everywhere for a very long time. This clearinghouse could be a way by which we overcome the traditional bottlenecks and ensure the technologies flow. This is why we've come forward with this idea. I'm sure the idea will develop with more inputs, and I hope we do end up in a space where the clearinghouse serves effectively as a strong decarbonization platform for everybody around the world.
Thank you, Corey, and thank you, Anirban. So everyone, that's really the gist of our second recommendation, Climate Technologies Clearinghouse, CTCH, to complement the CTCN, which already exists under UNFCCC, more as a knowledge hub. If it's complemented with a trade hub, we believe we will all go far. And we have now two reflections from two members of our working group. And first, I'm going to invite Zarmeen Pavre. She's dialing in from Sydney, and I'm sure, Zarmeen, it's very late for you. She's the partner at SGX, an early stage climate technology investing company. Zarmeen, over to you.
Thank you, and lovely to be here. And I suppose one of my first sessions when I sat in and heard about the clearinghouse, it really was as a practitioner in climate technology, as an investor, investing in deep tech solutions, climate solutions. And deep tech, I mean, they have got technology pieces, but they're really revolutionary. They're not evolution. They've got heavy R&D. They're based on science and engineering. We have in our portfolio a bar, which is that these climate solutions that we invest in need to be able to remove greenhouse gas emissions by half a gigaton per annum over 10 years. And so that's a really high bar, but we are very confident in some of these deep tech solutions because they're based on, the R&D and the science and engineering. But it has got so many, as a VC player, capital allocation to invest in deep tech. There are many hurdles that we also have to overcome to put this money into the investment because they're seen as risky. But 10 years ago, if you'd said that you wanted to invest in deep tech, it would be very hard to. But today, in today's climate emergency, we are seeing government funding flowing through. We are seeing non-diluted capital coming through, which is accelerating the pace and the scale and the development of these technologies. But some of the issues that have been raised in the paper are absolutely real life, and I wanted to share two examples. Corey mentioned and Anban mentioned some of these breaks in the system. It's absolutely felt right now. I've got two live examples that will be alleviated through this clearinghouse, which I'm really excited about. So we have got an impact thesis that says we will source technology solutions from Europe, Australia, and Asia. But the thesis is really about finding the solutions and then deploying it into where the impact is most needed. And we've picked Asia. The problems we have, which have been highlighted already in the report, so beautifully, is when we want to get these technologies to scale, we have the underlying venture has a lot of issues, and so do we, to think about country access points. We can't just plonk a solution into a new country context. Market feasibilities are needing to be done. A market entry strategy needs to be done. All of these hurdles to get to scale. The second thing is the cost defraying. The defraying of costs is essential because once we can remove some of those barriers, then the technology cost curves can come down, adoption curves go up. So this clearinghouse has got a lot of structural features that can really catalyze, accelerate, impact scale. Forget about financial scale, right? Impact scale, which is really important because of the time imperative. So one of the examples is we've got one Australian company that is actually focused on the last energy mile. It is a IoT and an AI-enabled mesh grid technology. It does off-grid installations and a plug and play with solar and battery. And it decided to go into Nigeria. 70 million people don't have energy access, and they did that through COVID. Now, to get into those countries, even into India and remote, you know, we would need partnerships, etc. So this clearinghouse would absolutely help this little company scale, bring about a real impact and authentic. And I think that's the one of the issues that we see, that whether the technologies are actually going to be able to really decarbonize at scale. The other point that I did want to, and it has been mentioned, is or it was mentioned in the working group, maybe I haven't seen the report, but the ransom, you know, the global south can be held to ransom because of colonization and the cha-ching dollars, if you like, on how big the climate tech unicorns can become. And one company we have got is a green concrete solution in Europe. And on the cap table, this is a real life example, on the cap table is a big corporate, a building construction firm. Now, we are fighting very hard for them to not be bought out. We want them to go and get access to the markets where are really big. And so this clearinghouse would enable, if you can consolidate procurement at scale, you basically are usurping that power, purchasing power at a country level, and you know, reducing the corporate capture is what I like to call it. So I think that there's some insidious things happening in the marketplace, but this is, I really believe this is absolutely imperative for, you know, climate technologies, especially in the deep tech, digital, you know, that will scale automatically, but deep tech is really the hardware that's really required to help on the ground. So I'm really pleased with all the findings. It's hitting spot on all the issues that we are seeing as a VC investor, and we need to do collaboration at scale. And time is also being weaponized, if you like to call it. We cannot afford delay, and collaboration at scale with, like we did with COVID, is essential. So I'm really thrilled to be here, and I'll hand it over to Amit.
Thank you, Zarmeen. Thank you. And thank you for joining so late. And we have one more reflection, and then we're going to, you know, have a series of special addresses and keynotes. And, you know, to really, you know, round this all up, obviously the final word has to go to Mr. Masood Malik, who's joining us from Hyderabad in India. He's the CEO of Re-Sustainability, Asia's largest provider of environment management services, a lifetime veteran in sustainability, even before the word got fashionable. So Masood, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Amit. Absolutely amazing opportunity for me to learn from what has been a great series of engagements over the last several weeks. So thank you so much for that opportunity. I think this is rare to actually find a forum that has both breadth and depth in its engagements and conversations. And I think I must congratulate you and Terry for getting us all together. I'll not repeat a lot of what I had to say. I think Zarmeen's already covered. I will just say this. I believe that technology flows going forward will be both north to south and south to north. It will be bi-directional. And I think, therefore, our policies, our programs, our framework should recognize that and facilitate that both ways. And even where there is a technology that's originating from the north, the access that it gets to markets, to scale, in the south is valuable, and that value has to be recognized in the commercial agreements, and therefore the construct of how we approach technology transfer. This was one. I do recognize that you know, our R&D dollars in the south are not as big as what's typically there in the north, but the amount of innovation, and I think the kinds of innovation that are coming out, even with frugal research and development in the global south, cannot be ignored. I think the other key takeaway that an opportunity that is there is for this proposed technology clearinghouse. Right now, I think it sounds a lot like just B2B, but I think there is another opportunity for matchmaking, and that is, B2F. It is business to financial institutions, and I think that is also a key enabler and an opportunity for a lot of these both consumers of technology and originators or the owners of technology to scale their impact. And finally, I think the focus of the technology clearinghouse, in my view, should be more on what Zarmeen referred to as deep tech. The early stage, high impact, those technologies where access is a challenge, particularly for the global south, as opposed to solar, for example. So I think focusing on a limited number of early stage technologies would really help create an incremental impact on this decarbonization journey. Thank you once again for this opportunity, Amit.
Thank you, Masood. Thank you so much for those, valuable comments. And everyone, look, this is not just another event. 50 people worked for last few months to put together 2 very solid research publications, and these recommendations stem from that. So just want to once again thank these wonderful working group members, our co-chairs, and all the speakers. And for the second part of our evening together today, India time evening, I want to hand over to my partner and friend, Karthik Desai, the founder of Desai and Associates. Karthik is really the convening force behind this event. So Karthik, over to you to take this forward, please.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amit. As Mr. Malik just said, it has been an absolutely fantastic series of discussions leading up to this. And thanks to all the working group members also for their efforts. And I must say, it really has been a tremendous privilege for all of us at DNA to help organize these global consultations and to now bring things to a close. Clearly, it's very, very highly actionable focused recommendations that have been created, co-authored by leading practitioners, bringing some of the most important chief sustainability officers and SMEs into what was till now an intergovernmental process, the climate dialogue, along with think tank experts. And also to share these recommendations officially with the G20 through the T20 Secretariat, thanks to ORF. As Mr. Desai said at the beginning, right, people like him and others started this dialogue in the 80s and 90s with the governments coming together. And it's amazing to see that Aspire Impact and the rest of us are doing this now with the private sector. So now that we have heard the core recommendations from the working group chairs and the 2 reports have been launched for all of us to review and share feedback prior to their finalization on August 7th. We wanted to get the first reactions to these from 5 very, very significant and high-profile global leaders whom we have assembled and we're very privileged to have with us to share their expert perspectives on the deliberations of these working groups and in this global consultation. So for our very first special address, I'm very, very pleased to introduce someone I personally greatly admire, Mrs. Vibha Dhawan, who is the Director General of TERI, the Energy and Resources Institute, which is perhaps India's leading research policy and implementation think tank for climate, with a team of over 1,200 scientists, economists, and engineers, led by Mrs. Dhawan, who are focused on these issues of energy, environment, and climate over the last 4 decades. We're very, very grateful to have TERI as the co-host of this consultation and benefit from their leadership in fostering international collaboration on climate. If I can add, I personally believe TERI is one of the few places in the world with the credibility and the potential to actually be a host for a clearinghouse in the English-speaking Global South. And with that, I would please request Mrs. Dhawan to share her remarks to the audience.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Karthik, for your very kind words. And I'd like to also put my gratitude to Mr. Nitin Desai, who's chair of our board. So he's mentoring all of us, and great to have him and be part of this particular workshop we are holding today. So on part of TERI and my colleagues over here, I would really like to welcome all the participants, and you all are in different time zones, so must be uncomfortable for some of you. But I feel it's time well spent, because what we witnessed in terms of the presentation by the various co-chairs, it's really great kind of work which has been done. And if we really look at it, we are going through a very difficult time today, because a couple of decades before we were talking about climate change to be a threat, but today we are seeing much uglier phases of the impacts of the climate change. Ever since the policy thinking and negotiations on climate change began, availability and access to low-cost technology and finance have been the fulcrum of debates and research. But even after 3 decades of establishing UNFCCC, they still remain the core question. We saw the highest global mean temperature rising over 17 degrees, goes without saying what is happening in our country in terms of floods and excessive rainfall, cloud burst, and so on. And it's really an alarm bell for all of us. And this asks for all-out action and coordination. So these reports are extremely important to me, and I'm sure to the global community as a whole. And I'm sure that they will be able to inform some breakthroughs necessary to limit global warming to 1.5 or 2 degrees. I don't think so we'll be able to stop at 1.5. But even if we are able to achieve or stop at 2 degrees, it will be an achievement. I just glanced through the reports quickly. I like to read through them carefully. And what I like most in these reports is that they address one fundamental challenge that developing countries face in their pursuit of sustainable development and low carbon economy. It's the challenge of information asymmetry that triples access to low-cost finance and technology. And surely it's a matter of concern for small actors. Just finding suitable information in itself becomes an expensive task, both in terms of time and even financial resources. If you think about it, the proposal to set up a climate technologies clearinghouse facility in a developing country is to ensure that necessary information about technologies, markets, institutions, funding, and even public or even policies around finance and technology flows easily among the developing country actors. It talks about facilitating conversation between buyers and sellers, encouraging collaborations between suitable partners, and provide due diligence on technologies. Because we are also confused what technology to go for. There are so many sellers for sellers for technology or with whom technologies are available. So, to my own perception, this proposed facility will play an important role in accelerating low carbon transition. And of course, that is something we can't avoid. If we have to go net zero by 2070, there is no role, and perhaps we also have to involve every stakeholder in this journey of making low carbon economy. The other report on ESG-led finance, to my mind, is really not a separate report. It rather completes the report on technology with a specific focus on the actors who find it most difficult to get through the information maze, that is the SME sector. India, where 60% of the production comes from SMEs, you really can't leave them behind. They have to be active partners. And it's the backbone of low-income many other economies as well. And millions of livelihoods and forex incomes in these countries depend on SME sector. And I'm sure in years to come, while today we are talking of large corporates going net zero, tomorrow they are also going to ask for their own vendors. Are they also sustainable, or they are also using sustainable energy? The potential for sustainability, the transition in SME sector, therefore, is very large. not only in terms of technological upgradation, but also their social and environmental aspects are significant. And perhaps they are going to be the engines of gender inclusive growth as well. So making finance a vehicle for sustainability transition in the SME sector, I would say, is really innovative. It offers a platform for SMEs to build their capacity, learn from experiences, and grow sustainably. In short, the two platforms, one on technology and other on finance, together can form the bridge on which the journey of low carbon sustainable transition in developing countries can be accelerated. The coordinators and authors, they have done a tremendous job, and my congratulations to them once again and to the entire forum. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Vibha ma'am. And just moving right ahead, and I realize we're slightly behind schedule, and we would like to introduce now Mrs. Anjali Kaur. So if you can just spotlight her, please, Harpreet. And while you're doing that, I'll quickly like to introduce our first keynote address for the day of my dear friend, Ms. Anjali Kaur, who's a Deputy Assistant Administrator for Asia for the United States Agency for International Development. Her prior work includes multilateral engagements with multiple UN agencies like the UNFPA, UNICEF, and the World Bank, as well as with major philanthropic firms like the Gates Foundation and other international nonprofits. The Biden-Harris administration nominated Anjali to serve as USAID's DAA for Asia, where she oversees programs and strategies in South and Central Asia, providing technical assistance across more than 34 partner countries in the Indo-Pacific region. She has helped to provide the plans for providing COVID emergency assistance and across all of these countries, and also with a focus on the effects and root causes of climate change and food insecurity. Anjali was recently in India, as many of you know, and other countries of South Asia, coordinating their development partnerships with the United States with a focus on climate change. And I was lucky enough to meet her last week in Washington, DC, just last week. And she was very, very kind to share her views with us. So absolutely delighted to ask Anjali to share her remarks today. Welcome, Anjali.
Thanks so much, Karthik. It's such a pleasure to be here. And thank you to Aspire Circle and Aspire Impact for gathering us for this really important discussion. I'm also grateful to each of you for joining us today to discuss in detail our shared efforts to address the root causes of climate change. I'm honored to be here with you representing the U.S. Agency for International Development, where we're working hard with our partners to mobilize innovations and new sources of financing to make climate-friendly technologies and investments widely available. The current scale of need is daunting, and we simply will not be able to achieve meaningful progress towards these investment needs without robust collaboration between governments, the private sector, and civil society to develop a creative solution that can be scaled up in other regions around the world. In India, we're working hard to help implement ambitious emissions reduction measures, transition to renewable energy, build resilience against the impacts of climate change, and promote the flow of capital towards climate positive investments. Particularly, as India takes a leadership role in the region, USAID is supporting India to develop advanced energy technologies such as solar, wind, electric mobility, and green hydrogen. We do this in partnership with the private sector, identifying innovative ways to attract climate finance and design financing tools to unlock capital. Today, I will illustrate the scope of this work by defining the key financing gaps in the clean energy sector, outlining the innovative financing instruments that USAID is exploring to address these gaps, and demonstrating how this approach can be emulated to mobilize finance effectively. As we all know, the Indo-Pacific region is a major contributor to global energy demand and carbon emissions. However, many countries in the region have demonstrated leadership by making commitments to adopt clean and renewable energy sources. By 2030, renewable energy is projected to become the primary source of electricity, meeting almost half of the region's demand. As per the International Energy Agency, developing and emerging economies account for 2/3 of the world's population, but only 1/5 of investment in clean energy. The current investment levels in renewable energy and energy efficiency projects in the region are insufficient to achieve the carbon neutrality goals by 2050. For example, India would need to increase the annual investment in renewable energy from $6 to $10 billion to 25 to 30 billion. Achieving this transition requires substantial investments in expensive energy infrastructure for which securing long-term financing can prove a major challenge. In the Indo-Pacific region alone, the estimated annual investment needs for renewable energy and energy efficiency range from $825 billion to $1.22 trillion. And so, looking at these huge numbers, we recognize that there's impediments to clean renewable energy investments, which include the limited capacity to bring bankable projects to financial closure, weak rule of law, an uncertain or cumbersome regulatory environment, and the absence of a successful history of similar projects from which we can learn. So it's important to note that these challenges are not unique to India. So solutions to these issues, if adopted in India, can also help other countries, both developing and developed. So over the years, the streams of capital that finance climate change work and other global development challenges have evolved as developing countries attract more private sector investment. USAID has a long history of working with the private sector by exploring innovative financing mechanisms and new approaches, policies, and products that can address market limitations. USAID partners with the private sector to increase market access for carbon credits, climate-smart agriculture, and forest products, and improve financing opportunities for sustainable land management. This includes facilitating green bonds for large-scale renewable energy projects, enabling microfinance solutions for energy access, and providing credit guarantees for small and medium enterprises. USAID India programs have already supported more than $600 million in investment through green bonds. Since USAID first introduced green bonds and helped issue the first green bonds through the Indian Renewable Energy Development Agency, the private sector has been the most active, issuing around 2/3 of all green bonds. We have also forged collaborative partnerships with organizations, including with the Asian Development Bank and the World Bank, to create greater impact with our combined resources. USAID is also partnering with larger public sector companies and government institutions such as NTPC Renewable Energy Limited, Power Finance Corporation Limited, SJVN Limited, and Indian Railways in deploying renewable energy to meet net zero targets. For example, we're working with NTPC Renewable to develop a financial strategy that would make $45 billion available for the deployment of 60 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity by 2032. And through a partnership with Invest India and Niti Aayog, USAID has undertaken several initiatives to cultivate a more enabling ecosystem for electric vehicles and e-mobility. In March of this year, we organized an investment mobilization platform for e-mobility, where investors and project developers came together to explore potential funding agreements. The engagements involved over 50 companies with the total transaction value exceeding $1 billion. We're also facilitating the adoption of exciting climate-friendly technologies in the forestry sector, helping to sequester more carbon and meet climate goals. USAID partnered with local stakeholders to develop a tool that allows state forest departments in India to develop climate-smart and sustainable forest management plans. The tool has proved to be enormously popular, and the government of India is scaling our forest management tool nationwide in an effort to achieve its goal of sequestering an additional 2.5 to 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide, equivalent from the forestry sector, by 2030. Importantly, our work is demonstrating results that deliver for communities. Since 2016, USAID has supported the deployment of 6 gigawatts of renewable energy in India, which is enough to power 3.9 million households. We have leveraged more than $2 billion for clean energy investments and have helped India to reduce greenhouse gases by 13 million tons, which is the equivalent of removing over 2.5 million cars from the road for a full year. So as we look to the future, USAID remains steadfast in leveraging our expertise and resources to accelerate the clean energy transition in India and around the world. India has a unique opportunity to draw on its comparative advantages to serve as a spearhead for innovation globally and regionally. We're working with private and public sector leaders alike to form partnerships and coalitions to share best practices and achieve joint objectives. This is where we encourage all of you to get involved. Our lofty goals to address the global climate crisis are only achievable through broad and focused coalitions. I hope that you'll leave here today with a few potential connections in mind that may have even seemed counterintuitive at one point or another. So only by working together can we create an inclusive and sustainable future for generations to come. Thank you once again for your participation and dedication to the global clean energy transition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anjali. Really, really appreciate you joining us from Washington this morning and for sharing your remarks. Next, we have our second keynote for the day by the United Nations Under-Secretary General, Mr. Amandeep Gill. He is also the Secretary General's Special Representative on Technology. Ambassador Gill, as many of you may know, is a well-recognized thought leader on digital technology. You may not know about his contribution to helping to secure the high-level international consensus recommendations on how to regulate artificial intelligence in lethal autonomous weapons in 2017-18, helping to draft the AI ethics recommendations of UNESCO in 2020, and then setting up in 2020 the leading international platform on digital health and AI as the CEO of the International Digital Health and AI Research Collaboration based at the Graduate Institute of International Development Studies in Geneva. Mr. Gill will be sharing with us remarks on the potential of digital technologies, how do we use metrics, indices like we do in ESG to drive transparency, and perhaps also on the potential risks and downsides we need to consider and look out for, and also about the work that he's leading on the Global Digital Compact. Thank you so much, Ambassador Gill, and over to you for your keynote remarks.
Thank you very much, Karthik, for the warm words, the kind introduction. And I want to begin by congratulating Amit Bhatia, Nitin Desai, you, Harpreet, and the team for this great effort, which is timely in the context of India's G20 presidency and all the challenges that Vibha and other speakers have highlighted before me. I have, like Vibha, glanced through the reports, and I look forward to reading them at leisure. There is much food for thought and practical recommendations there that we can all dive into. And thank you really for highlighting the potential at the junction of technology, finance, and the SMEs sector. That's a champion that we have not recognized enough. There's been a lot of focus on the big industry, but SMEs hold the key to progress on the green transition. In my remarks today, brief remarks, I want to highlight the potential and the peril of digital technologies. There is a unique opportunity next year at the Summit of the Future where a global digital compact has been proposed to come together as the international community to lay out a framework, a charter of digital principles, rights, objectives, actions for the future. And digital sustainability is a key component of those discussions. It's been featuring in the negotiations co-facilitated by Rwanda and Sweden, and also in the Secretary General's inputs in the form of a policy brief into that process. From where I sit, I see tremendous potential, next only perhaps to renewable energy in terms of leveraging for the green transition. And why do I believe that? I think digital technologies have a way of not only addressing inefficiencies in our public and private sector work, but they have a way of rewiring collaborations, allowing us to reimagine the way we work on a problem and involving unusual actors, more collaborators, and cutting through some of the obstacles, leapfrogging over some of the challenges that we face with a purely analog approach to collaboration. There's no substitute, but they bring in an element which, if wisely harnessed, can help us accelerate progress. So that's the first reason. The other reason is they bring a lot of transparency and accountability into the action framework. When you know where the point sources of pollution are, when you know precisely how trends are through real-time data flows and dashboards and analytics that are shared with all stakeholders, it allows everyone to fine-tune their actions to achieve the larger objective. And finally, there are specific solutions that digital technologies can bring about. And I'm very, very optimistic in particular about the potential of AI to accelerate research and development of these solutions, these innovations. Just imagine if an industry cluster that is making steel and that is spread across a region, if the various participants in the supply chains collaborate, pool data that is not proprietary, that does not leak personal information, and run analytics on it, and then help that help fine-tune the entire system for better utilization, more efficient utilization of energy. So that's the kind of potential that we've already started seeing in some places. Now, at the same time, with all technologies, there's a downside which has to be managed. The pull on energy of data centers and increasingly training of algorithms, the pull on scarce minerals and other resources that are extracted from our environment. So those are issues that we have to look at very carefully. And in particular, I'm worried about lack of a collaborative approach. If there is a competitive approach to algorithmic development, then we would be reinventing the wheel across multiple geographies in the world and retraining those algorithms using very valuable energy resources. So we have to get this right, without which, the potential cannot be realized. And that's why there's a big focus on governance in our work at the United Nations. Karthik mentioned some of the areas where that work has already taken place. And we are about to now launch a high-level advisory body on artificial intelligence governance. This is inspired partly by the IPCC model, where we've had scientists, experts from around the world come together and pool their insights and build a scientific consensus globally on what's happening, what needs to be done in terms of both adaptation, mitigation. So something similar is needed urgently on the AI side so that we can leverage AI and other emerging digital technologies for driving progress on sustainable development while limiting their harms, managing the risks in an inclusive, collaborative way. Just to conclude, I'm tremendously excited about this agenda. I didn't get the time to touch on finance, digital financing of development, something on which we've had a task force at the UNDP and with other partners a couple of years ago. That's very, very exciting. And there are ways in which we can leverage digital technologies to accelerate the ESG trends that we see emerging across the globe. So just want to thank you for your tremendous effort and look forward to seeing more such outcomes from all of you. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ambassador Gill, for your highly focused and insightful remarks and situating the outputs and the efforts of these working groups into this intergovernmental process on technology at the highest levels of global governance. Truly grateful for your participation early in the morning today in New York City. So thank you for being with us. Now, before we bring things to a close, we have two very special addresses. Our first special address is by Mrs. Dipali Khanna, who's the Vice President of the Rockefeller Foundation. She is responsible for seeing all of their work across the great continent of Asia to drive the continent's development. Many of you may know her from her work leading the foundation's Smart Power initiative, which provided clean and affordable energy to, I think, over 1 million people in India. And prior to joining the foundation, she was a member of Plan International's senior management team in Eastern and Southern Africa. She currently serves, incidentally, as a co-chair of the G20 India's B20 Task Force on Financing for the Global Economic Recovery and G7 Japan's T20 Task Force on Development and Economic Prosperity. Over to Mrs. Khanna for her remarks prepared for today's consult.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to be here today at this pivotal event, which is focusing on catalyzing climate innovations for a global impact economy. Our collective mission, as many of you here are aware, is no small task: to address the monumental challenges presented by climate change and transform them into opportunities for sustainable development. Firstly, let's discuss the need for catalyzing climate finance for global SMEs and supply chains. Around the world, small and medium-sized enterprises account for 90% of businesses, 60 to 70% of employment, and 50% of GDP, making them the backbone of economies and societies. Despite this, the World Bank estimates that about half of the formal SMEs don't have access to formal credit. The financing gap is even larger when micro and formal enterprises are taken into account. Moreover, the International Trade Center indicates that supply chains account for over 80% of global trade, but also contribute significantly to global carbon emissions. It is therefore essential that we unlock new and innovative forms of climate finance that both empower SMEs and promote sustainable supply chains. At the Rockefeller Foundation, we have seen that instruments like blended financing can be a game changer and a key for global economic recovery. I would like to emphasize that there are already some promising innovations in the trade finance domain, which we should take note of and scale. The second point is that we must address the urgent need to unlock climate technologies for the global south. Countries in the global south are predicted to bear the brunt of climate change impact. Yet they lack the technologies and resources necessary to mitigate and adapt to these changes. In 2021, 88% of patent grants were issued to applicants from just 6 countries, with US, China, Japan having the maximum share. The numbers are very startling. Initiatives such as the UN's Climate Technology Center and Network have begun to address this, but more action is needed. The world came together for this knowledge hub. Now it is time that the world comes together for a trade hub. We need to break down barriers such as intellectual property rights and promote knowledge and technology transfer between the global north and south. An excellent example of this was the Open COVID Pledge in the health sector during the COVID-19 pandemic, where several private sector companies made available their intellectual property free of charge and helped increase access to life-saving technologies across the globe. A similar model could be adopted for climate technologies. Finally, I would like to call on the T20 Secretariat to leverage its influential position and ensure these discussions translate into fruitful and meaningful actions. As a part of the Think 20, you have the unique power to inform and shape G20's policy making through research and evidence-based policy proposals. Our climate does not abide by political timelines, and the time for action is not today, it was yesterday. The stakes could not be higher, as the IPCC 2023 report declared that humanity is on thin ice. In conclusion, we must all come together to address this urgent global issue. It's time to galvanize climate finance for SMEs and sustainable supply chains, unlock climate technologies for the global south, and turn our discussions today into real action. I trust in the collective intellect, creativity, and dedication of this esteemed gathering to catalyze the much-needed climate innovations for a global impact economy. The Rockefeller Foundation is extremely proud to partner with Aspire Circle to convene such a stimulating and rich conversation on this very important subject. Let's meet this challenge head-on, and together we can write a future that generations ahead will be grateful for. Thank you once again for giving me this opportunity.
Wonderful. And with that, we come to our final keynote speaker for the evening, who certainly needs no introduction, but I'm going to give one anyways. We are truly honored to have with us in prepared remarks, Lord Nicholas Herbert Stern, or Baron Stern of Brentford, who is a British economist, banker, and academic. Professor Stern is the I.G. Patel Professor of Economics and Government, the chairman of the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and Environment, and head of the India Observatory at the London School of Economics. He was a president of the British Academy from 2013 to 2017, and was elected a fellow of the Royal Society in 2014. Professor Stern has also held academic appointments at Oxford and Warwick outside of LSE, and outside the UK at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, École Polytechnique and Collège de France in Paris, and at the Indian Statistical Institute in Bangalore and Delhi, and also at the People's University in China, in Beijing. He was a chief economist of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development in the early 90s and the late 90s, and the chief economist and vice president at the World Bank from 2000 to 2003. And here we have Professor Stern's remarks with all of us from his office in London, shared a few days ago, since unfortunately he wasn't able to be with us today.
It is finance of the investments that are necessary for achieving the Paris Agreement. So it's a deductive story. What investments do we need for Paris? What finance do we need for those investments? Let me remind you, before I describe that very briefly, why this matters so much. And I want to refer to remarks by my close friend, Bob Watson, yesterday, where he went on to the UK media and argued that on current policies, we were heading for at least 2.5 degree centigrade and possibly more by the end of the century. And that is one of the world's most distinguished climate scientists and a former very influential head of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So we have to recognize how fast we have to change. And of course, how fast we have to adapt, because a lot of very difficult circumstances are coming through anyway, even if we do act very quickly now. But the scale of the stakes we're playing for are just immense. We haven't been at 3 degrees centigrade for 3 million years, and Homo sapiens is about 250,000 years old. This would be devastating. Southern Europe would look like the Sahara Desert. Much of Bangladesh would be underwater and so on. I don't have to list all those things for this group, but we should be very clear the stakes that we're playing for, and they're very clear that we're headed in a very bad direction and have to change very quickly. Now, what's involved in changing very quickly is a great deal of investment in new ways of doing things, investment for adaptation and development. And I think we should be clear that much of what we're describing in this investment is mitigation, adaptation, and development, all put together. We shouldn't try to pull them apart. So we know what we have to do. The next is creating, and this is where I'll finish, creating the political circumstances and the political will where this actually happens. And there the developing world now, it seems to me, should be in the driving seat, setting the agenda, saying this is what needs to happen. India's been doing exactly that in this year of its presidency. I've been very happy to be part of that, but I think India's G20 presidency has been as good as they come in all this, and it's been agenda driven, and this idea has been absolutely central to the agenda. We hope, and we're working on it, and India's working on it through India's own G20 presidency, to take that story through to the Brazilian presidency, which follows, and the South African presidency that follows that. This is the leading emerging market countries from across the continent saying this is the international development story. And we're clear, we've done the work, this is what has to happen. In doing that, there's some things to do and some things not to do. It's very important not to set climate against development. As I've argued, there is no horse race there. It's very important not to set the poorer countries against the middle income countries. It's very important not to set Africa against Asia. The future of Africa lies in large measure on the nature of the investments in Asia over this coming decade. If those investments, particularly in infrastructure in Asia, look anything like past investments, then the future of the world, and particularly Africa, will look very bleak. So we are interdependent. We are doing climate and development, sustainable development, all at the same time. And it's very important that we see that. We shouldn't set mitigation against that adaptation. So much of this is wrapped up together. Huge amounts of adaptation to do, but we can do it in a way which fits very well into the mitigation story. And of course, I haven't had time to say much about biodiversity and natural capital, but that is an absolutely critical part of this whole story. So we know what to do, we know the mistakes to avoid, but above all, let me finish on the positive note, which is that now the developing world is setting the agenda. It's doing it in a very well-informed, analytically strong, politically savvy way. And that is our hope, that it is the developing world that continues to drive that agenda and overwhelms some of the more reluctant people in the G7 to accept the overwhelming logic of the argument. On the technology side, I don't think that the intellectual property right, patent kind of story is overwhelmingly strong in this context. If we're making drugs, then the definition of a drug is very tightly defined, and intellectual property rights are very important. If we're making electric vehicles, which will be very important, it's really about your skill as a car maker, your skill as a battery maker, how well you organize your supply chains. So as time has gone by, I've become less worried about technology. I think 15 or 20 years ago, we were very worried that somehow the developing world would be pushed into using technologies over which the rich world had a monopoly. And I think we're now seeing this, as I gave the example of electric vehicles, but it's the same with solar panels and wind and batteries and so on. This is about skills. It's about engineering skills. It's about doing things well, organizing them well. And increasingly, you see that happening in the developing world already. India's entrepreneurs are pretty good. China's entrepreneurs are pretty good. And they are making already big parts of this supply chain. So I see this as in large measure about fair competition, about a world which has got robust supply chains, about a world where you don't have something like a 90+% China monopoly on solar panels. And that means encouraging the making of solar panels in different parts of the world. That may involve some subsidy originally to get things moving. So I see these problems as around supply chains and trade and avoiding restrictive practices rather than technology, intellectual property rights. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot to do in the agenda that I've described, but I think it's not the narrow intellectual property story that we might have seen 15 years or so ago. So that's the way I would cast the questions. And if you look at batteries, if you look at solar, if you look at wind, if you look at the particular minerals and so on, if you look at the kind of chips that are necessary to run all these things, in these 5-6 areas, what we should hope for is a world where there are at least in each of them 4 or 5 major players, enough to give you the real competition that drives innovation, gives you economies of scale and learning by doing, and drives down cost. So I see this largely now as a story of international economic organization, of international trade, and building, as it were, the competition and the scale, and of course, at the same time, building the resilience in the supply chain, which we've seen in the last couple of years as being so important. So that's the way I would express the technology set of issues. On finance for small and medium enterprises, we know that essentially small and medium enterprises get by on local finance. As Nitin said earlier, I've been working in one village in UP now, personally for 50 years, and we've got data going back 70 years. They were very much involved in the 1970s in what we used to call the Green Revolution. And that meant changing from very inefficient forms of raising water to diesel pumping sets of 10 centimeter gauge, and then you had to sink the pumping set and you had to buy the diesel motor and so on. And that was the kind of investment, small scale on the individual farm, that you had to do. If you were getting into the maintenance of tractors, which started to arrive a little bit later where we were, but not so much later, then you needed to buy some equipment for the maintenance of the tractors, if that was your little. Thank you very much for having me, and I wish you a very good meeting.
Wonderful. And with that, we'll come to a close, and I'll hand it back over to Amit.
Thank you, Karthik, and thank you everyone for joining. And we are going to call this meeting and this global consultation to an end. But if our working group members are here, it would be wonderful to see you all on video, for a quick, photo op, a digital photo op. I don't know, Harpreet, if everyone is there, but if we can call on our working group members to switch on their videos for just a quick minute. I know we've run 15 minutes over and a few seconds won't hurt. And I'm going to request our secretariat to do a photograph, And thank you again, everyone, for your very, very precious time. I know we've thanked all our partners, but there were two people I really needed to thank, Harpreet Kaur and Devarati here, who actually were our secretariat and did all the heavy lifting and actually were the people who put together the first draft, in a record time. So thank you, Harpreet and Devarati, for your hard work. Thank you all for your contributions. We are open for accepting feedback for a whole week. Any ideas from any quarters, will be reviewed, and through our co-chairs, we'll try and integrate as much as we can before submitting the recommendations to the T20 Secretariat. You heard from so many different experts that what this working group has come up with is, absolutely on the mark. You heard from Indian government, they were already thinking of initiatives in this direction. And we very much hope that these ideas, go all the way to the finish line. So thank you very much and have a good evening. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.